Try it. All right, this is What's Wild in New Hampshire by wildlife biologist Eric Orff, except for I'm in Minnesota with my best friend of 60 years, Rick Hamlett. I've been out here visiting. He moved out here a year ago, or a little over a year ago, to be with his daughter and grandchildren and her husband. So here I am, out to visit Rick in Minnesota. And the one thing we've been talking about is quite a bit about the Londonderry Fishing Game Club, which really impacted our lives tremendously. I first met Rick in the winter of 62, 63. His father was in the Navy, and they moved back somewhere around the end of 62 or early 63, and I met him that winter in 7th grade at Londonderry School. And 2 years later, in 1964, my brother was taking hunter safety at the Londonderry Fishing Game Club on Clark Road in Londonderry, and I begged to go with him, and he allowed me. So I took hunter safety I think it's beginning in August of 1964 at the Londonderry Fishing Game Club. The chief instructor at the time was Charlie Johnson, and there was Bill Bushy, Jim Cates, I think Don Lynn, some names I want to mention again. So my history goes back to 1964 with the Londonderry Fishing Game Club, and Rick's about the same. I don't know, do you remember when you first?
I started a year after you did.
Okay, a little bit later, just a little bit later than me. And so this afternoon, we want to kind of talk about the history of the Londonderry Fishing Game Club, something we've been meaning to do for the record. So the Londonderry Fishing Game Club, so when I joined it, it was at Clark Road in Londonderry. To my knowledge, 1934 hangs in my head. It may or may not be right. Somewhere around there, the Londonderry Fishing Game Club was formed in the mid-1930s. Now, there were some members of the club that were much older than me at the time that were in the club. I know I mentioned Charlie Johnson was the chief instructor. Well, his father, Arthur Johnson, was still alive when he was around. I know he was one of the founding members of the Londonderry Fishing Game Club. I'm pretty sure Carl Swatzel was, and he was still active in the club. Joe Portnery may or may not have been, but he's kind of by that same age group. And finally, Red Phillips. Red Phillips definitely was one of the founding members of the Londonderry Fishing Game Club. Those are the four names that come to mind. You think of any others, Rick?
Nope, that's it.
All
That's
right, so actually, it was the second generation that were pretty much running the club. So we were in our teens, and they must have been in their 30s. Charlie Johnson and Bill Bushy and Jim Cates. So a generation older than us. So it was the second generation that we experienced. And boy, did I love the club. And soon thereafter, joined the Londonderry Fishing Game Club as a junior member. So sometime in the fall of 64 or that winter, I joined the club and began going to monthly meetings. And so the club was on Clark Road for a long time. I'm going to kind of make it a little bit more brief here. And in the late 60s or early 70s, there was no place to shoot there. It was a small clubhouse, and and we owned very little land, probably half an acre, not very much land. So we wanted more land, a place that we could shoot. So we decided to sell that club in the late 60s, and apparently, and I do recall, we actually bought a chunk of land in Candia and held that for a few years. Then, around what year was it that we got the land from your uncle? Can you remember?
No, I don't know the year that was.
Probably around 1970s, my guess. Somewhere in there, we decided to, actually, Rick's mother, Hazel Hamlett, was a real estate agent and had been looking for some land for us. And lo and behold, Rick's uncle, his name?
Winfield Watts.
Winfield Watts. So on his mother's side, Winfield Watts had 48 acres?
No, 33 acres.
33 acres, all right.
On the backside of Musquash Swamp.
All right, here he just said it, the backside of Musquash Swamp. So we decided to buy that, but we didn't have quite enough money when we sold the land in Candia. So the members at the time, I thought it was 20, but we have been wrestling over names the last few days of who were the founding members the second time of the land in Londonderry by Musquash Swamp. And I also should back up a little bit. When I was 15, 16, the Londonderry Fishing Game Club had annual field trials at Smith's Field. That's right next to the racetrack in North Londonderry, not far from the airport. The road actually went down to the Little Cohas Dam, the dam that Fishing Game built in the 60s to create wetlands. So Mr. Smith's land in Londonderry, remember his name?
Fred Smith.
Fred Smith, his land, allowed the club every year to have a field trial. Now, our field trial at the time, we were all hunters and fishermen, and so we had coon trials and fox hounds and rabbit hounds, and then we had bird dogs, pointers, and retrievers. So 5 types of trials with dogs, hounds, rabbit hounds, fox hounds, and coon hounds. And it was up to Rick and I usually there was something in a burlap bag that we got all wet and we drug to make the trails for the hounds, I remember. So we would race off through the woods, maybe a predetermined path or not. I don't remember that part, but I just remember grabbing, getting that bag wet and grabbing the rope and taking off through the woods and making a trail for the hounds to follow. And they would be timed by Jim Cates and some others. He had a flatbed truck there and a speaker system. So it was quite the event in Londonderry. We had lots of people there. And it lasted at least 2 days in September of several years in the mid-60s, before we bought the land over on Musquash Swamp. So here are the names that I can recall, that both of us can recall, that bought the parcel of land, 33 acres. We had to mortgage it, and Rick's mother took no real estate fee, and his uncle was willing to take the mortgage. So we've come up with 14 names. I thought there was 20 for a while, then 15, but we've only, the last few days that I've been visiting Rick, we've come up with 14 names of those who paid $11 a month for a couple of years. I know I was in college at the time. It wasn't easy to scrape up $11 a month, I can tell you that, but I did. So the 14 names that we know for sure, there's Carl Swatso, Jim Cates, Bill Bushy, William Bushy, Rick Hamlett, Rick Orff, Don Lynn, Don Nielsen, Don Delisle, and Don Rickard, and Ricky Dara, Charlie Johnson, George Cates, Jim's brother, Larry Anktel, a foot doctor out of Manchester, and Joe Portnery. So those are the 14 club members and the club was small. We had our monthly meetings still, but we all pitched in $11 a month to buy the land. Somewhere in probably the 80s, Rick and I would occasionally go to club meetings. Well, let me back up there. Also, let me let you know that in the 60s, there was a women's auxiliary to the Londonderry Fishing Game Club. So it was generally the wives or girlfriends. That was Mary Johnson and Shirley Johnson, who later married Jim Cates. So there was a group of women that were the auxiliary to the Londonderry Fishing Game Club, because there were no women in the club at the time, and there weren't for many years. So that was the group that actually bought the 33 acres. And then I think it was in the 80s when there was another 50-plus acre tract available, and Rick and I happened to go to the meeting, and I didn't go to them all that often, but at that meeting, the club actually voted not to buy the additional piece of property, and the vote was taken, and the vote was no. Well, Rick got up and said a few words, as did I, and we suggested that the club have a second vote, which then occurred, and at the second vote, the club voted to purchase the additional land where the 500-yard range now is. So you wouldn't have had all that stuff if Rick and I hadn't encouraged the club at the time to come up with the money to buy the additional 50-something acres and which is now the existing club. Oh, field trials, women's auxiliaries. Rick was part of the Londonderry Fishing Game Club's hunter safety instructors for more than a decade. Many of them there. Don Lynn, decades and decades as instructors. So a lot of them. carried on for a long time. Of course, in '68 I went away to college, so I didn't get back as much. I can tell you another story about Londonderry Fishing Game Club. When I joined, Little Coas Moss was a little out behind my house, and I discovered these duck nesting boxes. Well, that winter of '64, '65, I convinced the club to buy the wood, and that winter I built another dozen boxes or so in my basement, and the next summer, or maybe that winter, we got them out. Jim Cates helped us put them out. Some in Little Coas Marsh, some in Musquatch. Anyways, we put the duck boxes out, and I began checking them. Some 40 years later, as a wildlife biologist for Fish and Game, my assignment was to check the duck boxes at Little Coas. But it was really the club made such a difference to Rick and our lives. I mean, it's who we hung with, it's who we learned from, who we hunted with. They really helped form our lives immensely. I haven't been to a meeting in a long time. I hope to get to a few more. Rick, maybe not so, as he lives here in McGregor, Minnesota. We're fishing on Rock Lake. He owns a place right on the lake. We're out on his pontoon boat fishing today.
I'm not sure you should be telling them all that information.
Oh, it's going back to New Hampshire. So I don't imagine there'll be a bunch of New Hampshire plates lined up here at the boat ramp anytime soon.
We'll see.
His secret spot, Rock Lake. We've been fishing since I arrived 4 or 5 days ago and caught pike and crappie and a bunch of yellow perch today. So we're fishing, but thinking about, in the evenings, the wonderful times we had with Londonderry Fishing Game Club. So the original members that first formed the club in the 1930s, Carl Swatso, Red Phillips, Arthur Johnson, and probably Joe Portnary. That goes back to the 30s, and then, of course, we then bought the land in the early 70s, where the club now exists. And it's turned into more of, I guess, a shooting club than a hunting club. We all hunted. We had a running deer target there for a while, and a clay shooting place. So we put a lot of work in there and built the first clubhouse out there. It was a chicken coop that you moved from where? Litchfield, I think. Litchfield to Hudson.
I think it was Hudson.
Yeah, they took a chicken.
Took it down in sections.
Chicken down in sections, and I helped rebuild it. We actually, Bill Bushy and Rick and I, we would take his little cement mixer, and we'd do a 3 foot or 4 foot by 4 foot square, and kept doing that till we had the foundation and the floor. Then we put the chicken coop back up and had that for a number of years. Then it was burned down sometime in the 70s, I guess, but they found out who did it, and we were able to get some money out of that and built anew. So it's the second clubhouse on that spot. The first one was burned down by vandals. Anyways, that's anything else we can think about the Londonderry Fishing Game Club.
Well, only that, as Rick said, it made a big difference in our young lives.
Oh, absolutely.
It shaped them and gave us a core group of friends that we had for the rest of their lives.
Yep. Who's left? Who do you think is left?
You and me.
Me. Rick Dara, maybe. Don Nielsen, I'm pretty sure, is still alive. And I've got a fish. Oh, had a bite. Well, just missed a fish, but that's all right. I'm trying to do this. Anyways, yeah, I think Don Nielsen's still alive. Rick Dare, I'm not sure of. I've not seen his name in the obituary. Rick, if you're still alive, give me a shout. And so that's the history, to the best of Rick Hamlett and Eric Orff's knowledge, of the Londonderry Fishing Game Club. This is August the 24th, 2021. So to the best of our knowledge over the last few nights that we've been thinking about it, and been meaning to do this for a long time, but that's the history of the Londonderry Fishing Game Club, Londonderry, New Hampshire. We're both life members, by the way. They voted us in as life members for purchasing that land. Yes, they did.